Okay, so thank you very much for joining tonight. Thank you for coming to the workshop, and welcome, of course, to part 2 on Giovanni Bellini, the Nexus of Invention. And today we're going to explore even deeper into really why he is regarded as such a important, such an important artist in the Italian Renaissance, and why he was so influential. And we're going to look further, especially now in this introduction, we're going to look a bit deeper and further into the development that he was really quite vital to in the transformation of Italian painting, which involved the spread or the dissemination of the use of oil paint. Now, oil painting had been used before in the Renaissance. Mixing pigments with oils had been done in the Middle Ages. So what was really new about this development? Well, we're going to be learning a bit about that today, and we're going to learn who was involved. We're going to learn about how this transformation came about and why it was so significant. And it's not as simple as saying that oil painting was simply invented and it started in this period. It's far more truthful to recognize that while oil paint had been used, it hadn't been used quite in this way. And before the Van Eyck brothers, and before Antonello da Messina, and before Giovanni Bellini, well, it hadn't been used quite in this way, and it wasn't applied with the same constitution itself. Oil paint had been used before, but not the type of oil paint that was being made by these painters. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. All right, so let me just put my headphones in and we'll get into an introduction, but also an overview of the key ideas that we're going to be discussing today. So thank you for coming into the workshop. Let's have a lot of fun tonight, and we're going to have a big exploration of Renaissance art over the next hour or so. Today's workshop is about a very, very important transformation in painting, as I've mentioned already, which involves painting in oils. Now, Bellini played a really vital role in this development in painting during the Renaissance, which involved the use of oil paint. We're going to be learning about the introduction of oil painting to Italy today, and we'll also see how painting in oils, or using oils more extensively, and in this different approach, this new approach, how it really altered the visual effects of painting and how it changed the artist's process. Okay, so the material of oil and pigment, the material reality of oil and pigment actually changed the way painters worked, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. It's really fascinating, and some of the things that we're going to look at are going to really, really open your eyes to how surprising and how remarkable some artists really are as individuals, and how innovative they are. And some of the artwork we're going to look at today is so surprising and breathtaking. Now, some of these artworks that we're going to look at today, you might have seen before, but I'm going to show you a different way of looking at them. I'm going to show you a new way of looking at them that is going to help you appreciate how mind-blowingly extraordinary they truly, truly are. Okay, so we're at part 2 now on Bellini, this series on Bellini, which is entitled The Nexus of Invention. And we're going to be beginning with our introduction today, which is going to summarize some of the key ideas relating to our topic. And we're going to see the influence that came from other artists, or mainly one artist and a couple of others actually, artists from other countries as well, where oil painting actually really developed in this period in the 15th century. We're going to look at transitions within Bellini's own career and how his work evolved throughout his life. And we're going to see how inventive he was through looking at a range of his work, from small devotional panels to larger altarpieces. We're also going to discuss how oil painting transformed artistic practice. And that is going to lead into next week also, which is week 3, going to be week 3 on Bellini. Okay, so here we've got our welcome screen, which has got the Madonna and Child, which we did actually see last week. And this is from the 1480s, by the time that Bellini is really, really good at oil painting. As you can see, he's achieved such a depth of volume and a real sculptural solidity using tone, which has been really enhanced with the use of oil paint. And as you can see there, down there, we've got a beautiful oil painting by Giovanni Bellini painted on canvas, which is another great transition, which we're going to be looking at next week. Oils on canvas is another really, really huge topic that we're going to look at next week. So we've got Bellini. This is a self-portrait from around 1500 on canvas. And we can see here that by the late 1400s going into the early 1500s, sorry, so 1400s and early 1500s, Giovanni Bellini has really mastered oil painting. Now, how did he come to start using oils when he started off working in tempera? Well, down here, we've got an early painting by Bellini down there on the left. I'm going to fill this page up with art again. And I might just warn you here, if you're drawing, do quick sketches, because I'm going to fill this page up with art, and this is an introduction, and it's a really, really kind of, we're going through ideas at this point, and so your sketches ought to be quick and don't feel precious if it gets covered up with another artwork. This is us going right into the history of art at the moment. So quick sketches, quick note taking, don't worry too much if something covers up the work that you're looking at. And if it does happen and you want to go back to that drawing, you can always rewatch this and pause it on YouTube, okay? Because it's going to be going up on YouTube. So we've got a dead Christ here, dead Christ supported by two angels. So a completely remarkable little early painting by Bellini, which shows his amazing sense of landscape and perspective and integrating various different aspects into a painting, which is seemingly simple, like those figures on horseback and the pond and the clenching hands around Christ's arms there, and the sense of lamentation on those angels' faces. And so it's very sculptural, it's very Squarcione-esque, it's very indebted to Mantegna and Jacopo Bellini. So this is a really beautiful early tempera painting, and you can see that you can see that early style, the overemphasis on some of the anatomy and the stylization of the body is very, it's indicative of his early application, his early work as a young painter, heavily influenced by Jacopo Bellini and Andrea Mantegna. Now, if we look up here, I'm showing you the work of a different artist. That isn't by Bellini. That isn't by any of the Bellinis. It's not by Andrea Mantegna. That is Antonello da Messina. And Antonello da Messina was a Sicilian artist, still part of Italy, so he's still an Italian artist, but he's a Sicilian artist. And it's very, very uncommon that an artist from Sicily would have such an impact. I mean, Sicily did have artists, it had great patrons of the arts, and later on in the centuries later in the 17th century, it'd be the home to Sophonisba Anguissola, and as you all know, Anthony van Dyck would go and visit her there down in the 1620s before she died. But Antonello da Messina was an artist from Sicily. He was born in Messina, and he would actually change the course of painting in Renaissance Italy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and what he did now. So we've got a possible self-portrait by Antonello da Messina up there. And it's Giorgio Vasari who really claims in his Lives of the Artists, claims that it was Antonello da Messina who was responsible for introducing oil painting to the Italians, okay? It's more truthful to say that he disseminated a wider use of oil paint and promoted and shared the use of oil and pigment as a more complete approach, rather than mixing oils with tempera. So like I was saying earlier, oil paint had been used before throughout the Middle Ages and into the early Renaissance, but it wasn't used as an independent medium. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, artists painted in tempera and in fresco and with watercolor and with body color, which is more opaque watercolor, which is more highly pigmented. They did also start to add oil to their tempera paints, which is pigment ground up with clear water and then tempered with yolk of egg. In some of the later layers of a tempera painting in the early Renaissance or in the late Middle Ages, artists might start to add drops of walnut oil. And so it's becoming a kind of emulsion, but then some of the final layers of a tempera painting might actually be executed in just pigment and oil. So oil paint again has been used, but Antonello da Messina was so inspired by the painters of the Northern Renaissance, so artists like Rogier van der Weyden and Jan van Eyck, that he learned how to use oil paint as the predominant medium. That's the difference. It wasn't that he invented oil painting, and it wasn't that Jan van Eyck simply invented oil painting. It's that they started to use oil paint as the primary medium, and they started to explore the various different capacities and capabilities of oil paint. And in working predominantly in oil, you might still do an underpainting with tempera. That makes a lot of sense technically for lots of reasons. But then paint most of the painting in oil and build up the majority of the layers in oils without any egg. So just oil and pigment. And that oil and pigment medium can give you such remarkable effects, as you can see in both the portrait by Antonello da Messina and this beautiful Virgin and Child by Giovanni Bellini from around the early 1480s, which is oil on wood. So we've got Antonello da Messina. He was born around 1430 and he died in 1479. Very influential in Italy. Trained first by his father and then by an artist in Naples by the name of Niccolo Colantonio. Now, it was Alfonso V of Aragon who was the patron of Colantonio. He owned paintings by Jan van Eyck and by Rogier van der Weyden. Now, works by Jan van Eyck and Rogier van der Weyden were very popular, very sought after in Naples in the early and mid 1400s. The Northern style was quite popular actually in Italy at this time because it was so different and because the Italian artists and Italian patrons were very impressed by certain things that Northern painters were doing, like with the likenesses of the portraiture and with the attention to detail on the interiors and like minute details in the interiors and the perceived realism of the details and the interiors. It was very strikingly vivid and sometimes chillingly real in these northern art, in northern paintings. And it was quite mesmerizing for the Italians in this period. Now, so he had direct experience of looking at these northern artists, okay, and he also had contact with a northern artist called Petrus Christus, who was a very, very important follower of Jan van Eyck. Petrus Christus is a really brilliant artist, actually, beautiful drawings in silver point, beautiful paintings on panel, and he was in Milan in the 1450s, which meant that Antonello da Messina was able to have some kind of correspondence. And there's even speculation in the scholarship that there may have been an actual in-person exchange between them and that there could have been some instruction. So Antonello da Messina, who had seen works by Rogier van der Weyden and seen works by Jan van Eyck in the collection of Alfonso V of Aragon, who would have been very, very eager to emulate those effects and to use oil in that way, and then to have the opportunity to have a correspondence and possibly even learn directly from a student of Jan van Eyck would have been absolutely amazing for Antonello. So yeah, possibly had instruction. And it's also possible that Petrus Christus was the first northern painter to learn Italian linear perspective, which was pioneered in the opening years of the 1400s by Filippo Brunelleschi, and then by the 1430s widely disseminated by Leon Battista Alberti in his treatise De Pictura. Okay, so we have exchange between north and south, you know, north and south of those Alps, you know, the Netherlands and Italy having an exchange in this period. And oil, the use of, or the more extensive use of oil is moving south into Italy, with artists like Antonello da Messina showing a real interest, and Renaissance geometry from Italy and linear perspective is moving north. So there's this exchange between north and south at this point during the Renaissance. So look, I've mentioned some other artists, and it wouldn't be fair not to show them. So there is an amazing painting by Rogier van der Weyden. This is an incredible painting from 1460, as early as 1460. Now, Rogier van der Weyden, artist of the Northern Renaissance, he was born sometime around, possibly before 1399, around 1400, and he died in 1464. This is a portrait of a lady, and it's now in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And it's quite a small painting. It's only 34 centimeters tall and 25.5 centimeters wide. And these are the effects, or it has the effects, the naturalism and the soft and gradual and smooth tonal modeling that would have so impressed artists like Bellini and, just before him, Antonello da Messina. And you can see that Antonello da Messina has really tried to assimilate some of those aesthetic qualities into his own self-portrait there. So absolutely incredible. And I'm just going to allow you to see something else which is going to completely blow your socks off, which is this amazing painting by Jan van Eyck. And isn't it just absolutely unbelievable that this painting is from 1434? For a painter to paint this in 1434 is absolutely, it's beyond reckoning, really, for me, because, you know, I'm so involved with the history of art. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is I pick up a book and I start reading about art history, and I start looking at pictures. It's all I do every day. I wake up and I look at art and I read about it and I draw, and I then sort of, when I'm sleeping, I'm dreaming about it, and when I wake up I kind of start reading and looking and then drawing again. And for in my mind, for the date of 1434 being the date of execution of this painting is completely astonishing. It's utterly and completely astonishing. We're going to have to do a workshop simply looking at this painting at some point, and I'm going to go into it for a full hour, just this painting, the Arnolfini painting, the Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck. Now, the little bits of still life, the little orange on the windowsill, the little cluster of oranges on that chest, the pair of shoes, those little wooden shoes there, the little dog in the foreground, the draperies, the fabrics, the chandelier, the mirror looking back at us. You know, this was in the Spanish Royal Collection in the 17th century, and it would have deeply, deeply impressed Velasquez. The window, the drastic foreshortening, and this is before the artists of the North had any serious contact with Brunelleschian perspective, and so this is all done through not having that use of that particular formula for the perspective, and yet he has created a really quite persuasive sense of space in that interior. I could spend all day talking about it, but about this painting. But for an oil painting at this time in the mid 1430s, of this complexity, with this amount of texture, this amount of realism and sense of light and reflected light, it's a work of absolute genius. I feel bad that we're not going to spend all day on it. And but I can just point out a couple of things. There are a couple of things I can point out to you, which really, in this painting, which really does exploit the virtues of oil. And if you look at the man's right foot, you can see that the foot has this peculiar shadow around it, almost like there's a ghost. That is a pentimenti, or a pentimento, sorry, it's singular. And you can see that the foot had been altered, something that you can do more easily in oil than you can in tempera. You can actually work on top of layers and alter the appearance of the painting more easily in oil, because the paint is more opaque. Oil does, however, become more transparent over time, just like tempera does. Paint films do lose their opacity over time. Oil paint darkens and becomes less flexible, and it also becomes more transparent as the centuries pass. And that is why that change of mind, or that alteration to the composition, is now visible. There is also a changed position of the hand. The hand was originally in a slightly different position, the man's right hand, and he's tilted it further inwards to the figure, and that is another pentimento in the painting. And in oils, you can actually paint over earlier compositional ideas, and change the painting while the painting is underway. Now, that's not something you can really do with tempera, because tempera is such a fast drying medium, and it doesn't have the opacity of oil paint, because tempera is a paint which has far less body to it and thickness to it. With oils, you're grinding really solid pigments into oil, and you can actually build up quite a solid paint that will stand up very strongly. So if you've got lead white pigment and you're grinding that into oil, into linseed oil or walnut oil, that paint, you can pack in quite a lot of pigment into that oil, and you can disperse lots of pigment particles into that oil, and you can create a paint which is really solid and thick and incredibly opaque. Whereas with tempera, you're grinding the pigments into clear water, and then you're adding egg yolk to it, which has been diluted slightly to make it brushable, and you're adding egg yolk as a binder to that pigment and water paste, and then you're brushing on. And so oil brings this thick new sort of use of oil paint is really, really quite mesmerizing. And you can thin the paint down with various different things. You can add more oil, well, you have to add more oil in subsequent layers, but you can also make more transparent paints by altering the character of the oil, by thickening it in the sun, by adding various different resins. Well, the main resin used in early modern painting is mastic resin. Copal resin was used much later in the 19th century, but mastic resin from the pistachio trees grown on the Greek island of Chios is a great sort of resin which you can dissolve into oil, and if you mix that with some thickened oil, you can get a really, really amazing paint medium. So anyway, so Jan van Eyck was the painter who really, really, really pioneered an entirely new approach of painting in oils. He didn't invent oil painting, he pioneered a new approach of using oil paint. which changed the course of painting forever, not just in the north, but in Italy as well. And so we've seen how this came to Italy, and it really did involve Antonello da Messina, didn't it? Okay, so Jan van Eyck, amazing artist, born before 1390, and he died in 1441, and this is the Arnolfini portrait, which is oil on panel from 1434. Completely remarkable, completely and utterly unbelievable, that painting. Okay, it's in the National Gallery in London, which I might go and see this week. Okay, and let's see what I've got next for you. Right, so we're going to look at a little evolution here. Here we have got this remarkable Imago Pietatis. Okay, and the Imago Pietatis is the Man of Sorrows. This is an early Bellini, where he's using tempera on wood. And while it's quite an amazing painting, it's very deathly. It's got a great deal of sorrow to it. Amazing landscape, beautiful sky. You can still see that the paint hasn't got that sense of subtlety to it. It hasn't got that sort of, the paint itself hasn't been painted with much malleability. It hasn't been modeled and manipulated like you can with oils. And there isn't a sense of transparent layers to this painting. It looks like it's been worked up from light to dark without really much modeling between layers. Now, if we look a little bit later on, we've got this amazing Christ, the dead Christ, supported by two mourning angels. And this is a bit later. First painting, the one on the left, is from, you know, late 1450s, or possibly even as late as 1460. The one in the middle, the second one that I've put up for you, is from the early 1470s, so about a decade later. That is also tempera, but we can really see how Giovanni Bellini is growing as an artist. He's creating a more dynamic picture, having one hand protruding out towards us, and we feel quite close proximity to Christ. It's a much more physically convincing painting with the grip of the angels' hands and also the expressions on the angels' faces. And that, while we've got a great sense of Christ's, you know, weightless, heavy body, it's not weightless at all, it's quite heavy, and he's, you know, having to be lifted by these angels. So he is, you know, deathly, and that shoulder coming up shows how limp his body is. So he's, you know, so he has got a greater sense of form and sculptural naturalism and depth to his work, but he's still working in tempera here. Now, if we look at this painting, which is a much later painting from around 1500, so a time when Bellini is a much more mature painter, we've got Christ Blessing from around 1500. This is tempera, but it's also oil. There's tempera, there's oil, and there's also some gilding with gold in that painting. We're going to be looking at that painting a bit later on as well. And so we can see that the technique looks so different. Look at those three paintings, three torsos, three upper bodies, three Christs. We've got a beautiful Imago Pietatis. We've got an amazing dead Christ supported by angels, and then we've got a Christ Blessing. Now we can see the evolution here. We've got a great use of tempera in the middle, but then that use of two media, oil, quite extensively to model those final layers of the painting on top of the underlayers, has created far more subtlety, far more transparency and modeling with those layers of paint. You can see the layers underneath through the upper layers because of the glazing technique. He's just totally transformed as an artist. It's quite remarkable, and he would do even more than that, which we're going to see next week. Okay, so next week we're going to see what he did after 1500, which will really show you how this amazing painter Giovanni Bellini brought so much to the Venetian school and paved the way for subsequent great artists like Giugiani, Titian, Tintoretto, Veronese, Palma Vecchio, and a host of others. All right, so let's get into the workshop. That was a sort of very, very, very broad, for the time that we had, discussion and summary of what brought oil painting to Giovanni Bellini and how it got to him and what he did with it. Okay, so I wanted to establish that before we got into the workshop and before we got into some serious drawing. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and look at that painting in the middle with a bit more detail. Okay, so this is really where we can start really drawing and appreciating individual aspects of the paintings that we're going to be looking at today. All right, I really hope you all enjoyed that introduction, which gave an overview and summary of how oil painting arrived initially and where oil painting came from. And I hope you all feel delighted to know a little bit more about all of those things and to have an appreciation for Antonello da Messina also. And we will be doing a workshop on Antonello da Messina at some point as well, which will be fantastic. Okay, so we are now in the workshop proper and we're looking at the dead cry supported by two angels. This was the painting in the middle in the previous screen. We've still got tempera on wood, and we can also see that not just tempera is on this panel, but we can also see the underdrawing. It was absolutely vital or fundamental in the Renaissance for painters to execute a very thorough underdrawing in a tempera painting, because you wanted to establish the design before you set to work in tempera. Pigments are very expensive and tempera isn't the most forgiving medium. Once you've put something down, it's difficult to remove it and it's difficult to obliterate it with subsequent layers. Now, talking about that is really bringing to my mind the importance of drawing in the Renaissance in general. Now, the reason drawing was so important in the Renaissance, disegno was so important to the Italians in the Renaissance, is because it was so fundamental to all of the other art forms: sculpture, architecture, and painting. Drawing, we perceive drawing as an art now, but it wasn't necessarily considered an art in its own right in the Renaissance. You know, if we're drawing now, we generally often perceive ourselves to be making art just through drawing, but art wasn't considered in the same way in the Renaissance, and drawing certainly wasn't considered to be an art form in its own right. It was considered to be a preparatory endeavor, a preparatory prerequisite for the art. Okay, and it was also considered to be not just a necessary prerequisite, but really a fundamental aspect of the formulation of artistic ideas and for learning. Here, drawing has had lots of different roles. Obviously, there's been lots of preparatory and experimental and exploratory work on paper or on tablet before setting to work on the panel. Now, the drawing on the panel, the underdrawing on the panel, if we could scrape back all the tempera, we'd see a very, very thoroughly worked out drawing applied directly to the gessoed panel here, with lots of tone built up with hatching. And that drawing serves as essentially the start of the painting. So what Bellini has done is he's done a highly worked out and worked up series of preparatory drawings and designs. And with those highly resolved designs, he has transferred one of them to the panel. That could have been done with the use of a cartoon, where a design is worked up to the scale of the painting, and then that design on paper is then transferred to the panel by puncturing the outlines of the paper to allow the passage of charcoal through those holes. So it's like creating a stencil, which can then allow you to pass charcoal through that paper onto the panel and leave a visual impression, which you can then draw onto to complete the image, because you'll only get a dotted outline through that transfer process, which is called pouncing. Another way you could transfer the image would be to take your exemplar drawing, and instead of pricking holes on the outlines, you could just place that drawing on top of the panel with another sheet underneath the drawing, between the drawing and the panel, and that sheet would have lots of charcoal on it or black chalk on it, and you would press over the drawing, the top drawing, the exemplar drawing, and that pressure on top of your drawing would press into the sheet with all of the charcoal on it, which would then transfer a charcoal outline to the panel. And then what the artist would do would be to fill in that drawing with tone. Now you can see, if you look very closely, you can see lots of hatching on the figure of Christ there. And Bellini hasn't just, you know, drawn the outline before setting out to paint. He's also really modeled the painting. He's figured everything out before setting to work with tempera. And this is a classical approach. This is a very traditional approach. And if you're painting with one of those early Renaissance media, if you're painting in tempera, you need to work out the drawing before you start painting. It all has to be worked out, because the painting really is dependent, and the execution of the painting is so reliant on the underlying design. You have to know exactly what you're doing before you start painting. It's the same with fresco, which is the other great painting media used in the Renaissance, throughout the Renaissance, and into the High Renaissance, and into the Baroque, and into the Rococo as well after the Renaissance. Now with fresco, you are heavily reliant on your preliminary and preparatory drawings, because with fresco, you can't make any alterations once you've applied the paint. That pigment is fixed in the lime plaster, and it's completely insoluble once that has gone on, once that has dried. And so before you paint in fresco, you've got to work out every single detail before you start applying pigments to the surface. And so drawing, and having those skills in drawing, and having the ability to design an image that people are going to find meaning in, is incredibly important. It's absolutely essential. And if you're a sculptor like Donatello, or if you're a painter like Bellini, drawing is absolutely essential for the completion of your artworks. Now, with tempera and fresco, drawing is really inseparable from the process of executing a painting. That preparatory drawing and the cartoon drawing, they are absolutely essential to the process of painting. You can't execute the painting, and you can't even start painting without a preparatory design and without having everything worked out beforehand on paper. With oil paint, things are quite different. Starting to work in oil means that artists can actually change the design while the painting is underway. And when artists start to realize this, it changes the artist's approach. Artists start to invent compositions directly on canvases by the time you get to Titian. Oil painting really does, it transforms the history of art in so many ways. It frees the painting from the drawing, and that is something that Giorgione really introduces. That's why Giorgione has got to be the artist in the next series, is because he builds on to these developments in such a profound way. So immediately after the introduction of these developments in the workshop of Bellini. So we have to look at Giorgione next, okay? And yeah, that's something they're really going to look forward to. Now, so painting in oil really changes the approach that artists have. It changes the relationship between design and drawing and painting. drawing doesn't all of a sudden become redundant. It's not as though you don't need to draw. Drawing becomes slightly different though, or the status of drawing becomes slightly different. If you're not painting in tempera or fresco, if you're predominantly an oil painter, you don't need to meticulously transfer a fully worked out design to a canvas, because oil painting allows you to explore things differently, independently from the underlying design. Now, Bellini is a huge part of introducing this new approach, or discovering this new approach. Really, this approach wasn't invented; it was discovered, and it came about because of the materials. The materials themselves brought about a transformation in the history of painting. I find this sort of thing really fascinating, and it sort of takes a lot of the. It's circumstantial, isn't it? It's not about these individuals inventing these brilliant things. It's about the circumstances being conducive to the discovery of these new methods and these new revolutionary artistic approaches, which really change the evolution of painting and change the appearance and the process of painting. By the time you get to Caravaggio in the 1590s and into the early 17th century, he arrives in Rome in 1592 and he dies in 1610. Caravaggio didn't rely on drawing at all, and to fully understand the historical significance of Caravaggio doing that, it really helps to know about how that evolution came about and what led up to that. Because without this more historical point of reference, without an understanding of what happened earlier, you can't really appreciate the true significance of what Caravaggio was doing. Okay, and what Caravaggio was doing makes more sense within a historical trajectory. You really see what Caravaggio is doing. You see more of what he's doing when you understand a bit about this. Now, what I'm going to show you now is another little painting just on the side of this one. Okay, and the reason I'm showing you that is because what it is a little, well, a rather large altarpiece, quite a big altarpiece. It's almost 2 meters tall, almost 3 meters tall, which has got a slightly earlier painting slightly earlier than this beautiful panel painting, the Dead Christ, which has got, a Christ supported by angels there, which looks like it looks earlier than this one. He's on his way to this stylistically, with the subtlety of the modeling in the body and with the sensuality and also the subtlety in the pose. That earlier painting is a slightly clunkier, and this one is far more natural and more affecting and more emotionally powerful, I think, than that earlier one. Just to show, just a little reference point to show you that this was a popular topic, the Christ supported by angels. There's an amazing Carlo Crivelli version of Christ supported by angels, Dead Christ supported by angels in the National Gallery as well. Maybe we'll do a workshop on Crivelli one day. You'll have to persuade me to do that though, because I'm not his biggest admirer. So here, what have we got? We've got the Dead Christ. We've got symbols of the stigmata. He's got the hole through his hands from having been nailed to the cross. He's got the cut in his side, which was done to him before he was taken off the cross. Amazing sense of weight in the body there. I almost said weightlessness in the introduction, but I managed to stop myself. There's a huge sense of gravity to his weight, to his body. He is really without life. This painting shows the body of Christ without the divine spirit within, and that is the sadness of the angels. Is that the divinity is gone? Is that for this moment, all that remains is the human body of Christ.
that is that lifelessness, that lacking in spirit, that empty body, is the source of the pathos. There's also a real sense of death to it, a real sense of mortality, which is very powerful. Now, the use of color is very striking. That pink is absolutely beautiful, and we can't discount the possibility of some fading there. That red may have been far richer, the use of cochineal or rose madder as a shadowing pigment to glaze over the vermilion, to paint over the vermilion with in the tempera to increase the sense of tonal depth, may have faded because rose madder isn't, and these red lake pigments, cochineal and rose madder, these traditional pigments, aren't as stable on exposure to ultraviolet light from the sun. We've got loads of influence from sculpture, haven't we? And also there's something Hellenic about this sculpture. It's not just, you know, sort of static. There's something quite emotive about that raised shoulder, something quite sensuous. So even though we've got a dead body that is clearly really heavy, it's got the weight of a corpse to it, there's still that sensuality or that evocative sort of movement to the dead body with that raised shoulder and the head tilting backwards and to the side, which has that sort of Hellenic expressiveness, which is quite quite compelling. Lots of influence from Mantegna, as you will see, having done our previous work series on Mantegna, and obviously from his father, Jacopo Bellini. So we have got this beautiful altarpiece on the left, the San Vincenzo altarpiece, which was dedicated to Saint Ferrer. And this painting is in its it's currently still in its original site, which is in Santi Giovanni e Paolo in Venice, so the Church of St. John and St. Paolo. Okay, so that altarpiece has as you can see, and as I've already mentioned, a panel very similar to this one, but it's slightly earlier. Okay, so it's from the mid 1460s, possibly up to 1470, and the painting in the middle is painting in the early 1470s, so slightly later. So you can see that development in his approach and technique and execution. The top two panels has an Annunciation. So the top left is the Archangel Gabriel, and on the right we've got the Virgin receiving word of the Annunciation. I think those paintings already look rather northern influenced, and being in Venice, it wouldn't surprise you since they are quite, you know, close to the north. They're in northern Italy. And then we've got saints at the bottom, and then these smaller predellas down there at the base, at the very, very base, small predella panels. So that I included that to show you a point of reference, which allows you to see Bellini painting a similar topic slightly earlier in a way which shows him painting in a less mature, less subtle, and possibly even a less resolved way. You know, he's improved various different aspects in his work there in this painting, okay, from the earlier one on the left. So let's just allow you to focus on this one again. And we'll carry on with this for a little while before we go and look at something else, which is going to really, really please you, I think. Another really, really incredible painting where Bellini is painting in oils, working with oil paint. Okay, so I really hope everybody's enjoying the workshop. And don't forget that if you want to spend longer on your works, you can always go onto YouTube, check out the video and pause it for as long as you like. And I also do write a nice description in the YouTube video. So if you look at the YouTube, there's some nice text that I've written up. I spend a bit of time just writing up what was in the workshop, and you can find out where these paintings are. Obviously, it's all already written down there on the right where the paintings are. This is in the Stadtlich in Berlin. but I can start putting links and that sort of thing in the description below the video, where you can access these different resources, which will inspire you to find out even more on by yourselves, which, you know, you could end up, you know, finding things that really inspire you for your own work. And I would be absolutely delighted to hear about that if you were to, you know, be inspired by something that you found out in your own research and found, you know, oh, there's so many ideas. There's so many ideas that might really inspire you to take your own creativity in different directions, and could really, you know, be brilliant. Okay, so what we're going to do now is spend a few more moments on this before we move on to the next painting. And all I'm going to do before we move on to the next one is just talk about those angels. Those angels are incredibly Florentine. All right, so remember last week we were talking about Jacopo Bellini, Giovanni's father, spending time in the 1420s. In 1423, Jacopo Bellini was in Florence. In 1423, 1424, learning from Gentile da Fabriano, that brilliant Gothic painter. And those angels are so Florentine. They're very Neoplatonic, which shows that Bellini also had a receptivity to the sort of idealism of the Neoplatonic aesthetic. Those angels are very, very, they're, you know, you can't tell what sex they are. And it's because they are ideal forms, they're metaphysical forms. They're just to encapsulate ideal beauty and a transcendent ideal of what human looks like. And so they are indistinct in terms of their sex. So you can't tell if they're male or female, which is typical of Neoplatonic art. You also get a Neoplatonic male and a Neoplatonic female, but they're just so heavily idealized and transcendental as to look ethereal and ethereal, angelic, or just simply transcendental, formal, almost like forms in and of themselves without having an individual sense of likeness. Okay, and also the Florentine aspect also shows in the handling of the body and the anatomy. The Florentine artists of the 1430s, 40s, 50s into the 1460s really did promote the study of human anatomy. And you can see that Bellini is showing quite a lot of awareness of anatomy there. We've got the ulnar styloid process beautifully accentuated on both wrists there, and we've got that beautiful ulna running down that forearm. And obviously if you hold your right forearm in that position, you'll feel your ulna running along the outside edge of your forearm there, and there's my ulnar styloid process there. So he's really captured that quite amazingly. So he's, you know, getting good at anatomy there as well, which is really fantastic, and he's still just a youngster at this point. All right, so there we go. Look at this, amazing. I love this painting. It's beautiful, it's tiny, and it's absolutely full of amazing detail, which shows how he was so influenced by Northern painting. Now, this is after the time that Antonello da Messina was in Venice, okay? And Antonello da Messina really transferred a great deal of knowledge about oil painting to the Venetian painters, namely Giovanni Bellini and Gentile Bellini. And what these artists did as a group was transform painting in Italy. And the Venetians really adopted oil painting. Now we've got a beautiful little oil painting here by Giovanni Bellini, and it is in the National Gallery, and it is Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome reading in a workshop, in a landscape, and he is in a beautiful setting. And we've got these different sections, haven't we? Amazing composition with different sections of the painting. We've got this beautiful cliff there, got a little lion there, and we have this beautiful sky. We've got these distant mountains in another band. We've got these hills there in another band. We've got this watery lake there. Then we've got these fields, and then we've got this meadow, this heath, and then we've got the foreground. So it's this layered and banded composition, would be heavily influential on Titian. Titian would often just use 3 bands and distinguish 3 bands of his composition, with sky, with landscape, and then foreground, and they would be quite clearly distinct. This is so complex in how many bands it has going across horizontally: sky, mountains, hills, and a little urban cityscape, and then a lake, fields, meadow, and then the foreground. So there's lots of different lots of layers in that amazing composition. Absolutely beautiful. And it's really, really, you know, the handling of the oil paint is amazing, very northern influenced. So Saint Jerome is there studying in the landscape, and Saint Jerome is one of the intellectual saints. We have saints like St. Michael, we have saints like St. George, who are great military saints. We also have some intellectual saints, and I think the chief titan among them is Saint Jerome, and he's credited with having translated the Vulgate Bible from the original Hebrew and Greek, and that's why he is regarded as such an intellectual, because he had to, you know, translate those 2 languages into a coherent and truthful representation of the Holy Scripture. So that's why he's considered to be such a intellectual hero of Christian belief. But he's also considered to be a great hero of the ascetic. And the ascetic is someone who denies their desires, who rejects the body's calls for pleasure, and who has the mental fortitude and the moral fortitude to devote one's energy and capabilities to the pursuit of moral excellence and religious piety against the passions. Okay, so against the calls of the body, the appetites. That's what asceticism is. Asceticism can also venture into self-flagellation in order to purify the soul. That's how asceticism can go within the Christian and other Abrahamic traditions. You can get ascetic traditions in the other religions as well, and I'm sure that you would get ascetics in other religions as well, you know, like in other world faiths. So Jerome is often depicted with a rock which he's hitting himself with to purify his self, to rid his, you know, to punish the body, or to remove the body's power over the mind. I don't know quite how that would actually work, but that's part of asceticism, flagellating the body. He's also got his little lion there, which is really amazing, and I should show you something that you did see last week as well. Just put up the drawing there. So we've got a beautiful drawing by Jacopo Bellini. It is his you know, Giovanni's father. You see the lion does look quite light, doesn't it? What Bellini has painted there, the lion, what Giovanni Bellini has painted there, does look quite similar to the lines drawn by Jacopo Bellini. Now, these sketchbooks were left to Giovanni Bellini when Jacopo died, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all. It'd be perfectly sensible for Giovanni Bellini to make use of these drawings, which had been handed down to him by his brilliant father. Now, that drawing by Jacopo Bellini is a study of lions, various different lions, and it's in a sketchbook which is housed in the British Museum, as you can see. And he makes use of lead point and pen and ink in order to execute that drawing there on the left. And you can see that the lion is so beautiful and painted in oil. Now, that lion might not have been originally intended to feature in this painting. And the reason I can say that is because if we take a closer look, which we're going to, okay, we're now going to look closely at Saint Jerome and the foreground with the line. Okay, there we go. All right, so now if we look at that line, we can see, now this is oil paint making a little feature again. You can still see lots of underdrawing. You can see lots and lots of underdrawing under there because the paint has become more transparent. But another thing that you can see is that the foremost or upper layers of oil paint have become transparent enough so that when you look at the line, you can actually see the cliff through him. That is oil paint becoming more transparent. So you can see that the line was painted after. This is amazing. And this speaks to exactly what I was talking about earlier. The line was painted after the cliff. This means that the line wasn't in the original design. Now, that painting we looked at earlier, you know, the dead Christ supported by two angels, every aspect of that tempera painting was worked out beforehand. It was all worked out, it was all drawn out. No changes were made. But with oils, with that layered approach in oils where you can actually paint opaque layers on top of earlier layers and change the composition and alter the composition, that's what he's done here. You can do that in oils. Now, so you can see that the cliff, if you look at the line, you can see that the outline of the cliff and the cave is visible through the right side, the line's right cheek, and on the orbital, running along his orbital. And you can see the detail in the cliff through the lion's head, which shows that the line was not part of the original design. Giovanni Bellini had decided to paint that on later, and he hasn't got any underdrawing for it at all. And so in oils, you can actually change things after starting the painting. In fact, the painting might have also been basically finished. He didn't incorporate that line into the original design. This is a possibility that oil painting has facilitated. That means that the creative process is extended into the execution of the painting, whereas before it wasn't. That is a change in the history of art so profound and so significant that it's impossible to appreciate the history of art without understanding that, I don't think. You know, the way that oil painting, it's like you can't just look at modern painters. You know, it's like modern painters where, you know, if you look at fabulous 19th and 20th century painters like Van Gogh and Matisse and Picasso, they are in this creative flux on the canvas. They are inventing, and it's very much a personal statement of artistic intent from the start of the painting to the end. Now, that statement of artistic intent, which you associate with modern painting, you know, 19th and 20th into the 21st centuries, that's oil painting as a process of creativity where something might change and where possibilities are explored and paint is scraped back and the layers are added on top and the painting itself evolves. That started at this point in history. That started with the transition of tempera painting to oil painting. The ability of the artist to actually invent something about the composition that late into the process was facilitated by working in oils. That ability to change the composition and to introduce new ideas into a painting independently of the preliminary design started here, really. It started with these artists at this point. So this is like discovering the beginning of something absolutely fundamental to what we consider to be modern painting. And this is really it. It's quite profound to me.
and I can't imagine it not being profound to you. And I can't imagine it not. I just can't. I just can't quite. I can't quite. I can't. I can't quite get it when people don't find that sort of thing to be so amazing that they don't want to. It doesn't make them want to spend the rest of their life looking at art, especially when I want to be artists. It just makes you understand what art is more. You know, it's like that's put Picasso and Matisse in a different perspective now, because you know that process of invention that you associate with painting has got a history that wouldn't have happened hadn't it have been for artists like Bellini. So that is how important he is. He's not just important for his influence on Leonardo da Vinci, he's important for him really being instrumental in the beginnings of this whole new approach to making art with paint. It's that important. It's that important. It's that profound. You know, and you can go and look at this in the National Gallery. It is quite overwhelming. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I might need to take a minute. I don't know, yeah, it's just a completely, yeah. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, I've forgotten everything. What I was supposed to be doing. Saint Jerome with the lion. Okay, so that drapery is fantastic, isn't it? I mean, the use of oil to develop such a persuasive and convincing sense of volume, and also movement, and you know that natural pose. It's very lifelike, and he's captured his age. You know, he's an old intellectual ascetic who is devoted to bringing the word of the Bible to Latin Christendom. And that's why he's translating the Greek and Hebrew into the Vulgate. And we can see how much detail there is in the landscape. Some of the greens have turned brown. Some of those, you know, those umbrous brown plants dotted about in the cracks of the stone that are brown. That's the underpainting showing through. The green has gone transparent. Verdigris turns brown and disappears almost. It mainly turns brown. It sort of discolors. Copper verdigris. It's one of the historical pigments used quite widely throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. Saint Jerome is brilliantly placed on that little rock there, with his foot resting on a stone. You can really see how Bellini has captured the weight of his body, and he's gazing down at that text there. So this has been a really good chance for you to really focus in on the body of Saint Jerome and the foreground. And what I'm going to do now is give you a chance to look at that beautiful, beautiful landscape. Oh, wow. I mean, that is just so stunning. Just on its own. Just on its own, that would do, wouldn't it? Just as a standalone painting. That painting could just be a landscape, but the Saint Jerome is just below it. So look, I mean, that's the whole thing, okay, which you've seen, and we've looked at this, and now we're looking at the upper section, which is the landscape. Beautiful, stunning landscape. That use of ultramarine in the sky, and the use of ultramarine to paint those very, very distant mountains. That's also something that Titian would do much later on. So in the 1480s, Titian was still a very young boy. And when he was in the workshop as a young man, working and learning in the workshop of Giovanni Bellini, he would see this type of work being done, and the way that Bellini has divided the landscape into different horizontal bands would become habitual for Titian in his formula for making his paintings. And
a beautiful little bridge crossing, you know, the space between those two bits of rock. That landscape is so, it just is so peaceful. That white bird on the branch of that tree, you know, Giorgione would really adopt this style, and you'd simplify it even further and give more space to things, and create a sense of quiet, create a sense of peace, create a sense of time passing very slowly. This beautiful landscape is just amazing. I'm so glad to be doing this, because it really does, you know, doing this every week, Destroying from History workshop, it really does let me, or gives me a sort of commitment to really look at this sort of stuff and appreciate it more. So it's very good for me. And the oil being used to create the highlights on those clouds, that does not look like tempera paint. That is oil paint, working from darker areas to lighter areas with opaque white oil paint to bring out the lights on those clouds. That's a completely different way of painting to the way that it would have been done in tempera. You know, it's absolutely exquisite, so beautiful. I just want to go and look at it. The real thing in the National Gallery. Get out to your galleries and your museums, wherever you are, and go and draw in the museums and the galleries, and spend real time looking at just a small number of paintings. You don't have to see that many of them, just a handful that really mean something. So yeah, one thing that you don't see much in this painting is exposure of the ground. When Giorgione and Titian built upon the developments advanced by Giovanni Bellini, they would also leave fairly significant portions of the underlayers exposed as part of the finished painting. And that is amazing. That is so beautiful when artists do that. Now, Giorgione was completely pioneering in his own right. He transformed oil painting as well, but he wouldn't have done so if it hadn't have been for Bellini. All right, so what time is it now? We need to be getting on, because I'm getting hungry. So we're going to spend a few more minutes looking at this fabulous landscape before we look at another couple of paintings. If we don't have time for both of them, we'll do just one of them and then look at the other next week, which might be what we do actually. Because I want there to be a nice bit of time to look at your drawings. And I want also to be able to give you a decent bit of time actually drawing stuff. So it might be better just to do one painting after this, rather than the two. When you're looking at this painting on YouTube, you can obviously spend as much time as you like just by pausing it or by looking the painting up. But by participating live on Zoom, you get to show your work at the end. And also you get to ask me stuff at the end as well. So, you know, and that's really nice because I've got to know quite a lot of you. Obviously, lots of you are doing courses with me as well, which is where we really get to know each other, because we're having far more exchanges. And, you know, I'm actually showing you how to make things and how to draw things. And, you know, that's how I really get to know people. But you also get to show your drawings and ask questions here at the end. So, but if you do watch this on YouTube, or if you are watching this on YouTube and you haven't participated in the live workshop, it'd be great for me to be able to see your drawings. So you can always join the workshops. You're always welcome. And also you could, you know, send me your drawings or post them online somewhere and tag me so that I get to see. That would be great. So yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at another painting. This one. Okay, now this is a fantastic painting. As you can see, beautiful sense of perspective with that horizon line being quite low, which really gives Christ quite a lot of stature, and it gives him a sense of proximity, because whenever we see a painting with a horizon, when we look at the horizon, and when our eye is sensitive of that horizon, that is where we feel our eye is level with. We feel that our eye level is with the horizon, because you're always eye level with the horizon, no matter where you are, whether you're on a plane, whether you're on the Tour Eiffel, whether you are on the Empire State Building, you're always eye level with the horizon. So the fact that Christ is standing up like that, it gives him a sense of stature, but also gives us a real sense of proximity, because as people come closer, they sort of appear bigger. Now, there's something that Bellini has removed in this painting, and that is the that sort of piece of stone in the foreground. So usually in a painting by Bellini of a divine subject, there is a parapet divorcing our space from the space of the divine subject. So if you cast your mind back to the beginning of this workshop, cast your mind then, or even to last week, where we had that Madonna and Child painting, there's a parapet in the foreground. That creates a barrier between our space and the space of the divine subject. There isn't that in this painting. Now, it is possible that this panel has been cut down. Okay, it is possible that this panel has been cut down, but that's not certain. And there's another thing that could indicate that the panel has been cut down, and that is the fact that Christ's flag isn't visible. So in Christ's left hand, he's holding the flag of the resurrection, presumably, because this is Christ resurrected. He has the wounds of the stigmata. He has the slash in his, the puncture in his chest, and he has the hole in his hand. But he's living, and he is casting a blessing upon mankind. So he's blessing humanity, and he's holding a stick, and that would traditionally display the flag of the resurrection, which looks very, very much like a St. George's cross. It's just a red cross on a white banner. So it looks like the flag of England, St. George's cross. The flag of England is St. George's cross, the flag of St. George, and it was introduced as the flag, the primary flag of this country during the 100 Years' War, because Edward III made St. George the patron saint of England. And that's that, and so the two flags are very similar, but one is the flag of St. George, which is also the flag of England, and then there's the flag of the resurrection. They look the same, except the flag of the resurrection isn't a national flag or in that kind of format. It's often like a banner instead, but it's still a flag. But we can't see that, so he would have been holding that that flag of the resurrection. There's also some gilding on this painting, which is absolutely amazing. That's not something you see often in paintings of this point, around 1500, to be on the painting itself. But that gold, the gilding is there to show the divine light emanating, or radiating rather, from Christ's head. Now, that naturalism of the face is absolutely remarkable. It is so arresting, so vivid, so real. Really does absorb that influence from Antonello da Messina. The hair as well is incredibly realistic and light and transparent. He's really exploring and exploiting the visual capacities of oil now, like never before. That rendering of the hair, the very fine individual brushstrokes to create individual hairs, that's not something that is easily done at all with I'll get to the bunnies, David, don't worry. The bunnies are fantastic, aren't they? They are like new life, basically. The bunnies are like springtime and new life. If you think about, they're Easter bunnies, put it like that, okay? Not quite Easter bunnies, but they are kind of, they represent that. Just like the shepherd in the background behind, if you see the shepherd back there, that is indicative of cultivating life, and also alludes to Christ being the shepherd of man. And the bunnies are kind of within that sort of allegorical frame. You've also got the three Marys there above Christ's left elbow, Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary, and Mary Cleophas, Cleophas. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but 3 Marys, and then you've got a Veneto landscape and a town and beautiful evening sky, a tree with a bird in it. Absolutely unbelievable. But you can really see that he is exploiting and pushing oil to create these effects using single brush strokes to do individual hairs, not something you can do in tempera so easily, because oil can be brushed out with a much longer stroke, because it can be flowed out more on the brush, and you can create far more effect. It's a far more flexible medium, oil paint is, and so he's really mastered it at this point, and he is painting in conjunction with tempera. Now that is important. Any oil painting by Giovanni Bellini, it's highly likely that he started the painting with tempera, and it's quite likely that Titian started a lot of his early works with tempera as well, even if they're painting on canvas. And it's simply because tempera beautifully seals the ground, the gesso, and it also dries very quickly, which means that you can start working in your subsequent layers sooner. Don't have to wait for that paint to cure before you paint your subsequent layers, which you do if you're working in oil. So if you have a tempera underpainting, you can paint on top of it straight away as soon as it dries, which won't take long. Whereas if you're working in oil and underpainting, you'll have to wait, a few days to a week for that underpainting to dry, before you can start working it up. So you can see that the oil has really been used in the subsequent layers, not in the underlayer, but in the subsequent layers. There might be some final retouchings made with tempera. We know that you can actually paint with tempera on top of layers of oil, and it will just retouch certain parts that you wouldn't be able to do the same kind of thing as you would do if you were working in oil. But it certainly makes sense to do an underpainting in tempera and then to work subsequently in oil. Those little bunnies are beautiful. They're playing, they're happy. It's hopeful, isn't it? And it's new life. It's just a resurrected Christ. So very, very meaningful. So who have we got here? You can all see that it's Jesus, can't you? But Jesus is also God, isn't he? So there's that composite nature being expressed here with that divine light radiating from Christ's head. He is a man God. He's a man. He's God come flesh. And so he's represented here as a divine being, as well as being a man. And you are confronted with, or you're interacting with very intimately, without a barrier in between you and him. Very close, very intimate. You are here having a really, really serious, an intimate interaction with the creator of the world. That's God. It's Christ. And so that's what Bellini has done here. It's quite, I would say that this is it's quite a striking painting considering the importance and the theological and cultural significance of the figure depicted. For it to be depicted so close to the viewer, to occupy so much of the picture plane, to give him that sort of physical presence, and also to have him making eye contact with a very piercing gaze, that is a very, very, very extreme image. It's a very, very profound image, and the naturalism of the face, the very, very subtle tilt of the gaze. There's an ambiguity to the feeling, to the emotion, but there is that sense of elation to it, and his mouth being slightly open gives you the impression of breathing, which enhances that sense of liveliness. The eyes are doing different things. One eye is more open than the other, it feels to me. The eyes have different contours to the eyelids. That asymmetry creates a sense of movement to it, because one sets the other off. You keep flicking your eye from one to the other, which gives it that sense of dynamism, because you're expecting one eye to be doing something different to what it is. And so it excites the movement detecting capacity of the mind, because you're expecting something to change, because there's an asymmetry in the eyes. and the mouth being open, implying breathing, that slight inclination to the head. It's really mature. There's none of this extreme emotion. He's created an extreme image through proximity, through subtlety, through scale, with all of these other elements which are far subtler and more powerful, but also more difficult to define. So it's a very mature painting compared to his much earlier works. So he's blessing humanity, having been resurrected and living again. So the two natures, the human and the divine natures, have again been reunited in the body of Christ. And he's also fairly united with us, because he's giving us a blessing, and he's also very much in our space, looking at us. He's engaging with us. It's like he's really here physically, okay, and he's looking directly into our eyes. The rabbits playing are really indicative of what I've said, sort of new life, youth, and joy, and the season. The shepherd in the background being indicative of Christ as a shepherd, as he's giving us that blessing, and the three Marys alluding to the passion of Christ, to the crucifixion, to the Pietà, the deposition, and the entombment. They were all involved with that narrative of Christ's passion, from the agony in the garden right through to the resurrection. And he is here blessing humanity, and possibly about to find Thomas, for Thomas to then doubt that he has indeed arisen. And then he'll go off to Emmaus, where he will reveal to his apostles that he is Christ come back to life. So amazing, 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 amazing painting. The technique is incredible. The sculptural volume and solidity is achieved with the use of both tempera and oil, but the oil in the final layers and in the main painting is really, 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 really how he's achieved that effect. But also the subtle modeling in the body. Compare that to the earlier paintings, where there was a kind of hard outlines to the bones, hard outlines to the body, heavily reliant on underdrawing, which was still visible. This has matured very, very, very extensively away from what we started this workshop off with. And it's a lot to do with oil. It's a lot to do with simply the artist, Giovanni Bellini, maturing and becoming more sophisticated and more knowledgeable and more tasteful. I mean, I'm sure that you look back onto work that you did 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe not as long as that if you've not been making art for as long, or if you're only 17, then you might look back at stuff that you did last week and think that you've made such a huge improvement. I'm sure that was the same for artists like Bellini. I'm sure that was the same for artists like Dürer. I'm sure that was the same for artists like Leonardo, who would look back at their work and be like, oh, I could do a lot. Can't believe I did that, So for an artist like Bellini, that feeling could have been quite severe, because of how much he advanced during his career, because he was such a brilliant, fantastic, and amazing artist. So what we're going to do now is we're going to glimpse at one other painting, just glimpse, and we're going to do more on it next week when we've got more time. So there we've got the Palla Pruili, and the Palla Pruili altarpiece is a funerary painting, and it's getting into late Bellini. It's getting into really mature Bellini. Is an amazing painting. I'm going to really, really have a lot of fun looking at that with you next week and explaining why it's so amazing and brilliant. And I really hope you all enjoyed the workshop, and that you had a lot of fun, that you learned lots, and that you are as impressed by Giovanni Bellini as I am, and that you are delighted to have a new enthusiasm for the history of painting. And I look forward to drawing with you all very soon. And thank you very, very much indeed.